Yeah, babies, yeah, babies. Hi, how are we? All right, my dudes and dudettes. I actually found, oh, fuck, man, I can't find the paper. Okay, so next video. Uh, just to be clear, well, first things first, today's video is disappointment and reverting to old patterns. I think the feeling of people in society, disappointment in my own actions, naturally. You can't be disappointed in anything else because everything comes from you. It starts with you. It starts from your head, translates outside. I'm not trying to be philosophical. It's the real thing. Either I yell or I don't. I scream or I don't. I move or I don't. I panic or I don't. I get anxious or I don't. I get sad or I don't. A lot of the times, you're not really in charge of these things because you haven't set proper, I don't know, you haven't engaged. It's really the whole, if you want to build something, you have to establish a base. And sometimes we get overwhelmed and we don't really understand why. Most of the time, it's because our vision is moving faster than what we could handle, or we just kind of like the world is throwing something at us that we can handle. Funny because that reminded me of a poem that I actually have, and I'll try to find it right now. But, anyways, just I started, I wanted to start this video to be perfectly clear. As much as I enjoy making these videos, life for a penny. So, as much as I love making these videos, and as much as I get excited, every single time I actually like sit and I go like, I want to do some videos today. I start going through the notes, and some of these notes are just bigger than what I can handle. And whoever has been watching my videos or have watched some of my videos could actually look and see like some videos kind of don't make sense. They just give me a certain aspect of the flow of how I want to express myself. And from there, I kind of establish different notes. It's normally when I turn off the video, or sometimes even in the video, I take a couple of different notes for videos to be made. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do is always trying to explain to myself the things that I'm trying to explain in general. I mean, just to elaborate the things that I want to elaborate on, the things that I want to like experience and enjoy and like go through. But I'm going to start today's video, by this disappointment and reverting to old patterns. Because ultimately, every single time I'm starting to record, I instantly start thinking and feeling, oh, without it, I'll do it tomorrow. But the hell, and I start saying all kinds of nonsense. And the mood affects, and cute stuff affects, and a whole lot of things affect. But I have a couple of videos in mind for today, so let's just like go for it. Disappointment and reverting to old patterns. Reverting to old patterns, how does it happen? When you're working on something, when you're moving towards something. And for me, I noticed anytime I'm exhausted, and it's not just noticed, I read it. And there's the book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. That book discusses how there are things that become very instinctively and intuitive, and then our response to it are very much at the forefront of our mind. And there are things that require more thoughts. And every time I'm kind of like in a lethargic state or an exhausted state, or normally just like I don't give a fuck states. But it's funny because most of the time I don't give a fuck, or I say I don't give a fuck, it's because there's something that I really care about. And thus the disappointment in the title. Most of the time when you're actually trying to establish something, and again, like the feeling of people and society, we're reflecting on people around us and their existence in our life, whether they're people of importance, whether they're people that we care about, or whether they're just like random personnel. I think we allocate energy subconsciously depending on how the level of care and the level of understanding we have towards other people. And that we build on top of that kind of like preconceived capacity. So if you were to think of yourself from an energy perspective, you have the focus energy that we're discussing. Because if I am trying to talk to my dad and I want him to understand something I'm trying to say, for example, I would be a lot more patient if I was talking to a cousin of mine or the daughter of a cousin of mine. She's like 3 years old. I'll be extremely patient, and nothing would kind of like me personally would make me say I don't give a fuck in my head. With my dad, it might be different. With a complete stranger, it definitely is different. And it feels like we allocate these points of energy and we kind of like we use some form of stereotypes or just like a certain kind of how we engage with the world to allocate the people that are around us. And I feel it's a physical distance that we establish, even when people are sitting next to us. If they're complete strangers, how do we feel when we feel like they're encroaching in our space, versus if we don't feel like that they're encroaching in our space? Do we look at them in a more distant way or not? All of these are popping in my mind right now. But it's the old patterns that you have, and ultimately, when you're trying to approach something, when you're trying to change something, when you're trying to move towards something and become more, or yeah, become more. But there's like, as much as different as we want to be, ultimately we are different. But as we become more of ourselves and more towards ourselves, what we actually do is we uniquely establish our difference, and it becomes very much like seen and understood by others, or at the very least appreciated. Let's say appreciated, yeah, because that's ultimately our goal. Like, no, I don't care about your life, you don't care about mine, but like, I'm not going to disrespect you or any kind of like negative emotion or feeling that happens normally. And I would definitely want people to kind of look at me and feel the same way, or want to kind of like not feel anything, just claiming neutrality. But it feels like every time you run out of energy when it comes to the certain blocks that you associate people with, and it varies based on how you perceive your life and your surroundings, you revert to an old pattern. It is that way. It's becoming more and more obvious to me that the old patterns are the easiest to pull through because I spent so much time on them, and the new patterns are still very much in their infant stage. And sometimes it looks to me because you kind of have to have that sweet spot. And I go about the being objective versus being subjective, and being objectively subjective and subjectively objective, to be able to jump in and realize when you're losing your shit or when you're reverting to an old pattern. And also to be able to understand, well, you're too much in your head. You need to go and test out what you've been trying to plan or prepare, so that at the very least you get feedback other than your own feedback. And I got stuck in this loop for a while. In all honesty, that's the reason I got out of it was I was able to start, I don't know, negotiating with myself. And it's funny because almost every book I read about how to handle people or society or to grow and evolve, none of it I applied on the people around me, including books like, I don't know, it's like psychology, sociology, behavior. I never applied it to people. I figured, what's the point if you apply something you learn onto people when you yourself are not really familiar with how it works within you? And I think that kind of like goes all the way back to the Plato or Socrates era, when these guys were like, know yourself. And I would go back to the way I say it's like, there is no know thyself. Knowing thyself is literally one of those statements that you make that that simplifies your outlook on your own ego and kind of gives it a shallow perspective. And I would say, get to know yourself, because getting to know something is always, it appreciates the constant. It appreciates that you are always going to be there, but every single time you look at yourself, you're a completely different person looking, and you're a completely different person in the viewpoint of what you're looking at. And getting to know yourself makes it a lot simpler for you to kind of like humble yourself and humble your approach and understand fully that the ins and outs of your state, your reactive state, your relational state with yourself. And ultimately getting to know yourself, because every single thing you actually like introduce to your life, it only matters if you understand how you're going to use it or utilize it, or whether you want to utilize it or not. It only matters because any time you look at it in terms of how it's going to reflect on the outside world, you are the main source of reflection. You are the main source of expression, and you are the main source of that creation. So creatively, every book, when they tell you you have to talk to people in a nice way and you have to like take your time and you have to listen, do you do any of these things with yourself? And when you do, how do you engage with yourself in order to understand? Because sometimes you make this, you say stuff that you don't really like, and sometimes you say stuff that make you feel sad, and sometimes you say stuff that make you feel happy. And each one of these patterns and themes have their own environments and moods where they're most efficient and effective when it comes to your own life and your own approach and your own growth and your own, I want to say, like engagement and happiness. So I wrote this note. I remember when I was upset and my mind was going doing things. And the reason I was upset is because I said something the same way I always did. But it was after 4 hours of exhaustive kind of like not to say it. My first attempt was to try to be like the new person that I was working towards. But then after a while of that not seen, because people don't give a fuck, I found myself reverting to my old self, which made me feel disappointed. But it's fine because my ability to explain it and to elaborate on it shows how far I've grown ever since I actually noticed it, took that note. And thank you guys for listening. Peace. Yeah.